reading from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 3. John the Baptist started preaching in the desert of Judea, saying, "Turn back to God. The kingdom of heaven will soon be here." John was the one the prophet Isaiah was talking about when he said, "In the desert, someone is shouting, 'Get the road ready for the Lord, make a straight path for him.'" John wore clothes made of camel's hair. He had a leather strap around his waist and ate grasshoppers and wild honey. From Jerusalem and all Judea and from the Jordan River Valley, crowds of people went to John. They said how sorry they were for their sins, and he baptized them in the river. Jesus left Galilee and went to the Jordan River to be baptized. But John kept objecting and said, "I ought to be baptized by you. Why have you come to me?" Jesus answered, "This is how it should be, because we must do all that God wants us to do." So Jesus was baptized. And as soon as he came out of the water, the sky opened, and he saw the Spirit of God coming down on him like a dove. A voice from heaven said, "This is my own dear Son. I am pleased with him."
Prophet. Prophet's a Greek word, though we had him in Israel long before the Greeks swept in, rolling them lingo over ours. After them it were the Romans. Both were incompatible with us. Many gods? Savages. My parents, they loved me, but it weren't easy. Even knowing I had a different future ahead of me. Villagers reckoned I were odd, but then they thought the odds were too. Before I were born, you see, Pa had a vision. He couldn't speak for months. And Ma, they gossiped, the locals. Who cares? We all knew I had a special calling. I were a bit of a wild child growing up, though not quite like most. Course I forgot to wash, wore the same robe till it fell to bits, grew dreadlocks and turned veggie. But it weren't all that. I couldn't help noticing the appalling way folks behaved, or commenting. Proper stream of consciousness. I argued that much at synagogue, they told Pa to leave me at home. That were a first. It were God, you see. It were God. In me ear, my eyes, my head, even my dreams. Constant commentary. That's probably why I started going off by myself. At least it were quieter. No interference. Ma and Pa, they worried. They were getting old. Bless them, never once suggested I get a proper job. I started wandering further afield. Ma, she'd slip me a food parcel if ever I went home, offered to do me jobs, me washing, like, probably a hint. She were always pleased to see me, but the religious nutter turning up, that always meant trouble. Mind you, nobody cared if I gave the Roman squaddies an ear bashing, tax collectors, even the prissy Pharisees, godly not. But the rabbi, the well-heeled, and the party animals, they must let me go now. It were never about me. He were coming. I had to prepare people. I took my soapbox to cities and towns, built a reputation. God's mouthpiece. Then I headed out to the wilds along the Jordan. Not too far, you understand, even for folks after a freak show, like creepy old Herod. The Jordan, it were special. Joshua divided it to bring our people home, and its waters, the healed Naaman, the Syrian, man look much. But it's tough. scratching round for food. Takes a lot of locusts for a square meal. I gathered malted camel hair to weave and darn my own clothes. Ma had taught me. Then God said to wash away their sins, refresh their behaviour. So I ducked them in the river as a sign that they'd thought, and thought better. Not some ritual self-cleansing or Jewish converts making a gesture. It were a once only, marked the start of reorientation, getting right with God. Suddenly they were coming in droves, all sorts and conditions. Nobody laughed and pointed at me now. Baptism, Greek again, was serious. It were a matter of life and death. God's Messiah, Christ if you want the Greek, coming any minute, I told them. But when? Then one ordinary day, after a preaching session, some Q&A, folks asking how they could make the change, there were a long queue down to the water's edge. All of a sudden, the voice in my head said, "He's here." I looked up. The sun were behind him as I waded out. Ordinary, but not. I looks him right in the face, and I says, "You'd best wash me, Lord." He didn't seem that surprised. "No, let's do what God wants." I stood there, dripping, but he waded deeper. Then he guided my hands to plunge him. Nobody seemed to notice as he came up, that dove appearing from nowhere, and the voice so loud, proclaiming his son, his delight. Someone in the crowd said, "Thunder." I'd longed for and dreaded this moment. My washing were done.
John was puzzled. Here was the one person who really didn't need a change of heart, not even so much as a quick rinse. He'd never imagined the Lord would come to him, as he'd done before either was born at his parents' home in the hills. Perhaps he'd worried that he wouldn't recognise the one. No need. But why on earth had Jesus joined the queue of penitents, declined the offer to wash John instead? Here was God, slipping quietly into his own creation, in its midst, not setting himself apart. He waded out into the waters polluted with every shade of misdemeanour. He stepped into the miseries of a race alienated from his own way of love, immersed himself in their guilt and shame. God was no longer behind a curtain in the Jerusalem temple, or represented by distorted religious practices. Jesus made God inclusively present, not exclusively remote. The time for prophets, go-between loudspeakers of God's will, was ebbing away. Telling would give way to showing, in person, what God was like and his hopes for headstrong humankind. Echoes of John's Jordan Valley human laundromat would be integral to Christian tradition, made holy, like bread and wine, by Jesus himself. More visibly than anyone else, perhaps, John was waiting. Waiting for what?